The psychological framework of covert narcissism over the archetype of a Luciferian family structure. In the architecture of a covert narcissist home, there are no raised voices, no shattered glass, and no obvious monsters. Instead, there is an invisible, suffocating order, a psychological panopticon where abuse is re-engineered as enlightenment. To understand covert narcissism within a family, one must look past the petty, boisterous ego of the overt abuser and step into the insidious mechanics of a Luciferian family structure, a polished, sanctimonious hierarchy governed not by the overt force, but by the quiet, ruinous doctrine of false light. In this hidden sanctuary, the covert narcissistic parent does not demand worship through tyranny. They cultivate it through martyrdom, intellectual superiority, and a chillingly weaponized form of perfection. They cast themselves not as the dictator, but as the misunderstood savior, the light bearer, or Lucifer, who alone possesses the moral clarity, taste, and emotional restraint to guide the redefined souls under their roof. The tragedy of this structure is not just that the children are controlled, but that they are manipulated into becoming active participants in their own erasure, convinced that the hand crushing their identity is only the hand keeping them safe from the darkness outside. Welcome to the Sovereign Renaissance, a channel through the arcane, mystical, and occult science. When you layer the psychological framework of covert narcissism over the archetype of a Luciferian family structure, the structural alignment is striking. Both operate on the exact same core mechanisms: the preservation of a grand illusion under the guise of superior virtue, wisdom, or enlightenment. When overt narcissism uses force and grandiosity, covert narcissism, like the Luciferian archetype, uses refinement, subterranean power dynamics, and the false light of moral or intellectual superiority. False light versus covert virtue signaling. In occult and esoteric symbolism, the Luciferian motif represents the bearer of light who is ultimately driven by pride and self deification. In psychological terms, covert narcissism operates on vulnerable grandiosity. The Luciferian mechanism. The family projects an aura of unique enlightenment, high-minded philosophy, esoteric knowledge, or flawless public morality. The covert narcissism parallel. The covert narcissist rarely boasts openly. Instead, they position themselves as the quiet martyr, the deeply misunderstood intellectual, or the most spiritually pure person in the room. The shared result. Both use an elevated standard of perfection to ensure that any outside criticism is dismissed as coming from those who are simply uninitiated or morally or intellectually inferior. Intellectualized cruelty and sacred justification. A primary trait of covert narcissists is their ability to inflict severe emotional damage while appearing completely calm reasonable, and composed. The Luciferian mechanism. Harmful behaviors, isolation, severe emotional freezing, extreme conditional acceptance are framed as necessary initiations or tests of discipline or teaching higher truths. The covert narcissism parallel. The covert narcissist uses weaponized therapy speak, philosophical abstraction, or quiet coldness instead of screaming. They frame their cruelty as holding boundaries or helping you grow. The shared result. The victim feels abused, but because the delivery is smooth, quiet, and wrapped in guidance, they are gaslit into believing they are the defective ones for being hurt. The shadow system and scapegoating the unmasked. Both systems rely on keeping the shadow, the actual dysfunction, abuse, and human weakness strictly buried beneath the surface. The shadow, Luciferian family structure. The shadow is buried human imperfection, vulnerability, or systemic abuse. The covert narcissistic dynamic of the shadow, the fragile, empty ego, and deep seated shame of the parent or system. The dynamic of the golden child and the Luciferian family structure, groomed as the perfect avatar of the family's secret strength. The covert narcissistic dynamic of the golden child, co-opted extension of the narcissist's self-image. The dynamic of the scapegoat under the Luciferian family structure is framed as fallen, corrupt, or incapable of handling the light. The scapegoat under the covert narcissistic dynamic, designated repository for all the family's suppressed shame and anger. When a family member calls out the truth or demonstrates authentic vulnerability, both systems react with systemic ejection. The person who points out the darkness is labeled as the only dark thing in the room. Total bypassing of authentic empathy. The most profound psychological parallel is the complete replacement of authentic empathy with calculated perception management. The Luciferian paradigm. Empathy is viewed as primitive, emotional liability that weakens the lineage or individual mind. Relationships are transactional, based on alignments with the system's goals. The covert narcissistic paradigm. The covert narcissist lacks effective empathy, feeling what you feel, but possesses sharp cognitive empathy, understanding how to read you to manipulate you. The shared result? Interpersonal warmth is offered only as a reward for compliance and withdrawn instantly when independence is asserted. Psychological mechanics, how control is enforced. Instrumentalized gaslighting, the enlightened doubt. In standard gaslighting, the abuser says, "That never happened." In Luciferian gaslighting, the abuser says, "Your perception is hindered by your own emotional weakness or lack of maturity. I am simply helping you to see it clearly. The victim's emotional reactions, be it anger, sadness, or anxiety, are pathologized as proof of their unworthiness or lower intellectual standing. Isolation through exclusivity. The outside world is framed not just as dangerous, but as vulgar, unrefined, and ignorant. The family unit operates with an us versus them mentality. Friends, outside family members, or external influences are systematically dissembled through subtle intellectual mockery until the children trust only the parents' perception of reality. Double bind enmeshment. The family motto is an unspoken paradox: be extraordinary, to reflect well on the light bearer, but never surpass or disobey the light bearer. If a child achieves true independence or outshines the parent, they have committed the ultimate Luciferian sin, rebellion against the Creator, and must be covertly humbled. The psychological toll on offspring. Living inside a Luciferian family framework creates unique psychological injuries that differ from traditional trauma responses. Epistemic self doubt. Victims grow up completely divorced from their own gut instincts. Because the abuse was wrapped in logic, kindness, or intellectual phrases, they struggle to prove them. They struggle to prove to themselves that they were abused at all. Spiritual guilt. Leaving or setting boundaries feels like an act of hearsay. The victim feels an overwhelming, inexplicable guilt, as if they are abandoning the only source of goodness in the universe. The inner inquisitor. Long after escaping the family home, the child retains a harsh, hyper-rational inner voice that scrutinizes every emotion, mistake, or vulnerability, deeming them weak or irrational. The structural core. A Luciferian family structure is ultimately an ecosystem built around the worship of a false god. Its power lies not in the darkness it creates, but in its ability to convince its victim that its binding, cold light is the only warmth they will ever be allowed to receive. The core psychological synthesis. Both structures are built on a foundation of profound, unacknowledged shame. To avoid facing the internal void, the system constructs a brilliant, impenetrable outer shell of intellectual or spiritual dominance, demanding that everyone inside worship the illusion or be cast out. The ultimate horror of the Luciferian family structure is that its victims are never permitted the mercy of a clear enemy. When the covert narcissistic parent operates under the guise of a benevolent light bearer, escaping the family system feels less like fleeing an abuser and more like apostasy, a betrayal of the very divinity that fed you. You leave not with physical scars, but with a fundamentally rewritten reality, forever auditing your own sanity in the quiet. In the end, The darkest trick this false savior ever pulls isn't convincing the world they are holy. It's convincing you that the burning inside your chest isn't trauma, but your own inherent unworthiness of their light. And if you liked today's video, please do like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, goodbye.